bit late today, so I'm not quite set up. Now you can't see my head. That's no good, is it? Oh, that's sinking down. Still can't see my head. Bear with me, guys. You can see, fortunately, there's only one person watching at this point. There we go. Hello. Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Zadie Blouse Sewalong. Hi, Nicole. Let me get myself all sorted so I've know where everything is. Quick slurp of tea. So, part 2, guys, if anyone's watching this and doesn't realise there was a part 1, there was a part 1 where we did the front of the blouse. Hi, Helen. Hi, Val. Hello. And we've got Hannah joining us today. Rosie is filming for Stitch School today. So the lovely Hannah is there to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, feel free just to pop them up. If they are related to sewing, in terms of kind of difficult dressmaking questions, Hannah might not be able to answer them. So sorry that we won't be able to do that, but we can always you can always email us if we're not able to answer. So yeah, just yeah, let's get started. I feel like I've had quite a full-on morning, and so I've just literally sat down and stopped, and so I'm sort of just decompressing as I get into this. We've got a double whammy today because we've got to I'm doing this, and then later on we'll be doing the big hand sew. So some of you I'll be seeing twice. You'll be like, so much of Lisa. Oh, the Sidbury slip. Oh, I'm glad to see that you like that, guys. Yes, we've got a new pattern out today, the Sidbury slip, which is part of the Stitch School pattern. So if you are a member of Stitch School, you get that for free. But if you're not, you can still buy that. And it is, yeah, the idea is it's a kind of slip to wear under your dresses. So you don't have to line them, or maybe just to add extra warmth. Anyway, I wanted to do a slip pattern for a while, so I'm glad that we've done that. But we're doing the Zadie today. Now I do, literally about a minute before I went live, I realised I hadn't put a Zadie blouse on. So I'm sorry, guys, no Zadie blouse. But I did in the first one, never mind. I'm wearing a Bilberry hack today. I think you guys have seen this before. So we're going to do the sleeves today. That's the next thing. Because it's a raglan sleeve, we can't do any of the neckline until we put that sleeve in. So we're going to attempt to kind of do the cuff, and we've got the darts as well to do. So this is your sleeve pattern, which looks strange because that top V is where there's a dart. And you also will have a cuff opening. Now I have marked where the cuff opening was. There's a line on the pattern. I'll show you there. I'm going to mark that on with you a bit more, but we'll talk about that when we get to that bit. But I did just put it, for now, just put a notch at the bottom of that line. So we'll just work with one at a time. One, I think, today. Just do one so that we can try and get the little bit of the slip, the cuff done. So what we've got to do first, guys, is we've got to pin our dart. So the dart is a bit like a bust dart. You've got to think of it like that. The way that we're going to sew it, it's not going to be sewn. Where's my point? It's going to be reverse stitched at the beginning and then going down to the point of the dart there. So there is a circle at the bottom of this V on the pattern. I'm going to cough, excuse me. You need to mark that circle because that is the point of your dart. So I've got my circle marked there. So I'm just going to put a pin in here so I know where that is. And then I am going to pin the rest of this edge, these edges together. So right sides together. Okay. Now it's not like a dart that we're going to mark in a stitch line. We're going to just stitch with a centimetre seam allowance. So that should take you, as you come down, following that centimetre seam allowance down here, that should take you to the edge here where the point is, the circle is. So line up with on your machine with your centimetre marking, or 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to do a nice reverse at the beginning. We're not going to reverse at the end. So just like a bust start, we want it to be a really smooth point, and if you reverse, risk it getting bulky and not refined at the end, and therefore not making a smooth transition off the fabric. So I literally just stitched off the fabric, and I've got 2 threads there, and I'm just going to knot them together, and that's how I'm going to finish off at the end of the dart. Okay. And then I'm just going to snip those like so. Okay, so I believe we need to do we need to do some overlocking to give them, yeah. So I'm not going to use my overlocker because it's not threaded up the right colour, so I'm actually just going to go straight in and zigzag stitch it, just to stop those edges, and we're going to just zigzag stitch them together. So when you're doing a zigzag stitch to bind the edges, you want to make sure that when the needle is on the right, so it's going to go left to right, it just grazes off the edge of the fabric, off the edge of the seam allowance. And that will essentially bind the edge. And you will find in a lightweight fabric it might pull in the edge, you might kind of get a bit of curling, but that's okay, don't worry too much about that. Just with this though, you can do a nice reverse at the end and at the beginning. Haven't done overlock, haven't done zigzag stitching like this for ages, and I always assume that it's going to look super messy, but it doesn't. Yeah, looks fine. It's a little bit crumply, but when we iron that, that will be fine. So we're now going to iron that towards the back. And the back of the sleeve, like any back of the sleeve, is marked with a pair of notches. So if I pop this on here, I've got my pair of notches there, and we're just going to press it towards there. And we're going to be very careful at the point, because this is essentially creating a curve here. It's creating this curve so that it fits over the shoulder. So we need to be careful that we don't create a funny shape there. So just be careful using the point of the iron, and very light-handed at that point. Oh, Coco's here. Okay, so I'm just, sorry guys, out of shot, but no Coco, off the tripod. Press that towards the back, and then if we look at it from here, okay. Now this dart is something, Coco, off. This dart is something that you're going to potentially need to fit, and it is going to be tricky to see at this stage if it's right or not. You might need to tweak it later, because it's, although you can see that that is going to sit like this on your sleeve, on your shoulder. And I have got a little bit of a protruding point, but I don't know if that will settle once once this all sits in, or whether I'm going to just need to just refine that. So that is something you can do though once the garment is sewn together. So you don't need to worry about having to fit it at this stage, because it's tricky to do that. But you'll find that it just protrudes up a little bit, sometimes too much in some fabrics. But you can change. All you need to do is you need to go to the end of the dart, and you just need to change the angle that it hits that folded edge where the point is. So maybe it needs to be more gradual. So even though we've done a centimetre seam allowance, this is now a fitting issue. So you need to change it and create that shaping. It might be that you just need to put a slight curve in at the end just to soften it as well, rather than it being a sort of a straight line. Okay, so that's what we're doing at that point. So let's, rather than going just doing the same with you on the other side. Let's go on to the cuff, because I'd like to do as much of this as possible with you, because this could be quite fiddly. So I'm just going to put the pattern, I've got the pattern there, I've got my little notch marking that line. I'm just going to measure what this line is. So it is 9 centimetres. So 9 centimetres, we need to draw ourselves a line going up from this notch at 9 centimetres. But I'm just concerned that I don't, to get it super straight, it would be easier to make sure your line, your drawing is going in the right angle. I'm just going to make a little hole at the top of this line with a pin. And then we're just going to mark through with that. And so I've got a little marker then. So I'm using a Frixion pen here, but I think we put in the instructions that it's absolutely fine for you to use a biro, because this is not going to show. So if you're finding that your tailor's chalk is not holding, not marking properly, you could use a biro. And then I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to just draw that line. So I have a line. Can we see the line? It is there. And that's quite hard for you guys to see. But I've got a line now. So now what we're going to do is we are going to stitch around that line to reinforce it, because we're going to essentially snip up that and then open it into the straight to bind it. And if we don't put this stitching in, it's going to be very weak and potentially rip. So it will be, it's sort of like a reinforcing stitch. And we want it to essentially be about 1 millimetre from on one side of the line, coming up, pivoting and coming 1 millimetre down on the other side of the line. Maximum you want 4 millimetres in between those two stitch lines, okay? So, let's pop that in, tuck that under. So we're going to put it onto a straight stitch. Now, you can see, I'm just conscious that maybe I should just change this angle a little bit so you can see a bit more of the sewing machine. There we go. You're losing the top of my head, but there's not much exciting stuff going on the top of my head. So going down on one side. So I'm now lining up. So I've basically, the groove is just off the centre, because I'm going to start on the left side of this line. So again, aiming for 1 millimetre from the line. And take it nice and slowly. Okay, I believe I'm at the top of the line now, but I've put my needle in to hold it, and then I'm now going to pivot it. And I'm going to stitch across. Yeah, that's fine. So really just 2 stitches worth going across the top of that line, putting the needle back in and pivoting and coming back down again. I think I saw a Pretty Woman comment about the fabric there. I completely forgot. I got off the Sewalong on Monday and I completely forgot to add the fabric, but the fabric is now online. But yeah, we talked about that actually on Monday, that it is, isn't it? It reminds me of that lovely, yeah, I think it was Lorianne that said that, but it reminds me of that Pretty Woman dress. It's gorgeous. So now I'm just going down the other side. Again, trying to keep to that millimetre away from that central line. Oh, thank you. We've just had a link put up by Hannah. Thank you. That's the link is up. We weren't able to do that because I hadn't quite added it. I'm a bit behind this week with everything. Right, you're not going to be able to see that, I don't think, but I'm going to hold it up in case you can. Yeah, super, super close. So now this feels quite scary, but it's what you're meant to do. We're going to snip up along that line. Okay, so We've got the stitching there to protect the fabric, so we're now going to cut along that pen line. Ooh, also so carefully that you don't cut through your stitching. Really try and use just the sharp ends of your scissors for this. You do need to have sharp scissors to do this. Ooh, I feel like I'm barely breathing. There we go. Okay, and essentially that would open wide, you see, like that. So now we're going to take one of our bias strips for our cuff opening, and we are going to pin that to one side. So I'm going to try and keep it like that so you can see. So pinning it to one side, so lining up the raw edge. Just check that I am meant to be lining up the raw edge. Yeah, that short edge there, and lining up the edges there. Now the difference between this, and just let me triple check, is when we come to the top of this point, it's going to be extending out. Bias strips. Yes. So where we're lining up to the raw edge there, when we come to the top, we actually need the bias strip to stick out 8 to 9 millimeters. Okay. So I'm going to try and show you that. I'm going to pin it first. So where I'm pinning it along this straight bit here, it's sitting right up next to the raw edges are aligning. But as I come up to the top of this cuff opening, I need to get at the top 8 to 9 millimeters worth of bias strip sticking out from beyond the blouse opening. So if you can see, that looks like from this side, you can see there. So there, it's 8 to 9 millimeters at that point, but here it's lining up. So as I'm kind of coming towards that top point of the cuff opening, we're then pivoting at that point. We need to make sure we've got 8 to 9 millimeters sticking out. Okay, then we'll kind of come round the other side and again you were aiming for it to sort of halfway down the cuff, for it will be lined up perfectly raw edge to raw edge, but at this point initially we're going to be still having some sticking out. And then smoothing off to nothing. So lining up now. I'll show you up close again once I've done this, guys. Oops, I'm pinning on the wrong side. There we go. And I have got a bit of an extension of cuff binding here, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'll trim that off afterwards. That can happen, especially in viscose, cut on the bias. It could have stretched a bit. So that is what it looks like. You can see in the middle of that cuff point there is binding that's sticking out beyond the edge, and that's what it's meant to be like. So now we're going to sew it from the cuff binding edge side so we can see. I'm going to use that as the seam allowance. So we need to sew it with a centimetre. Sorry, I've got like something in my eye. Sew it with a centimetre seam allowance and in one continuous line. Okay, so lining up with the 10 marker on the base of the machine. Let's see, I want you guys to be able to see a bit. Make sure you do your little reverse. And this first bit will feel easy because it's just straight raw edge, even though you've got a bias strip you're working with, it's just straight sewing. But then as you get closer to this point where that break point is going to be trickier, and you will need to slow down, and I might even just do that by hand as I approach there. So I'm just going to stop, and I'm just going to now use the hand wheel because what I can do is a stitch at a time, and I can keep lifting up and checking that I'm definitely catching it. Yes, I am. And I'm not hopefully putting any tucks in place. I'm keeping that pin in as long as I can. Whoop, yep, I'm right on the edge there now. Woo! I'm just going to do another stitch by hand. One more, and then let's see where we're at. Yep, still on there. Can kind of feel it. Just do a little bit. Lift up. Yep, I think I'm past the tricky bit now, guys, so I can come back down the other side. But all that time, I'm keeping the binding edge on the 10 marker, so I'm keeping it to a centimetre seam allowance. But the difference is your underneath, it's not aligned to that. Okay, here we go. Let me show you, it's easier to see now that it's stitched. Yeah, so it was stitched in a straight line, but you can see at the point where it hit that break point, that's now sticking out like that. Okay, let me trim those off. I'm going to trim this off as well now. I don't need that extra on there. I'm just going to get rid of that. It's only going to get in the way. Okay, so I believe we need to press it before. Press the seam allowance towards the bias strip, and with the wrong side together, press the raw edge of the bias strip over to meet the raw edge of the binding that's now attached to the cuff opening. Okay, so let's move this out. Let's get Mr. Iron. Time for Mr. Iron. There we go. We are going to place that like that. And we're going to be pressing the seam allowance up towards the binding. Okay. Okay. Just using the point here because it's actually quite fiddly. It's still, you know, even though we've reinforced stitched that, that's still a weak point there in the middle. So now that that's pressed up there, we're now pressing this wrong sides together like that, lining up those edges. So those raw edges of the binding are aligned. Okay. I just couldn't think I could press that a little bit better just in the middle there. Okay, and then I believe we'll fold the remaining folded edge of the bias strip the wrong side of the sleeve and align this. Carefully press the seam allowances wrong sides together, press the raw edge of the bias strip over to meet the raw edge of the binding that is now attached on the cuff. Okay, we've done that. And then we're folding the remaining folded edge of the bias strip to the wrong side of the sleeve and align this on the top of the seam and pin. Sorry guys, it's a while since I've done this. I don't know why that's there. The folded edge is coming to the inside. I'm just concerned because I've got a little bit extra and I don't know if I need to trim that away. Okay, so Yes, I need to do one more turn. I'm just going to turn it one more time. Just turn over that edge. Fold this over. I'm doing this slightly different way around, sorry. It's funny that when you, obviously we have a way of writing our instructions so that we're always consistent. But as those of you that dressmake quite a lot, you have ways that you do little things like this. It doesn't really matter. If you're learning to dressmake, you'll know that there's a few ways, you'll find out there's a few ways of doing things. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. And sometimes doing something somebody else's way feels a bit fiddly. So now what I'm doing is I'm just pulling this folded edge now over to the stitch line there. So that stitch line, I'm just making sure that I'm just sitting right on that stitch line. So where the cuff was attached, the cuff binding was attached to this opening. Okay. Like so. You could, if you wanted to, trim down that seam allowance a little bit. You could trim it down to half its width. But you should be using something that's relatively lightweight, so it shouldn't have too much bulk at the seam allowance point. And voila. Like so. Okay. And now we're going to slip stitch that. So I've just realised I've not brought a needle to me. But let me see if I can find one in here. There's always one lurking at the bottom of a pin dish. Yeah, there we go. It's a beast, that one. Let's see if I can find one that's slightly finer. Yeah, there's one. I think that's from my embroidery hand sewing sessions. There's a better one. So slip stitching is really hard for me to show you on this camera, but I'm going to try my best. Okay, so I'm just going to grab some thread from here, and I think it might be easier for me to do this standing up so that I can keep moving into you guys so I can show you a bit closer. So I'm going to take a single thread and then I'm just going to knot the end. And cut that off. Okay, now I'm a left-handed person, a lefty, so it's going to feel a bit fiddly, seem wrong that I'm going to go that direction, but it's the same technique whether you go that direction or that direction. So take your first pin out and just come up through the seam allowance and catching the folded edge of the binding on the inside there. And just do a few stitches. I think probably one more, and that's anchored my thread. So I never rely on just a knot to anchor the thread. You always need to do a couple of little stitches. Okay, so then I'm holding it like that. If I can rest here, and so you can see a bit clearly. Now I'm just coming in just inside. In the seam allowance, I'm not going, so I'm just using the seam allowance, so coming in the seam allowance and just coming up right on that edge where the sewing is and catching the folded edge of the binding. Oops. Then I'm just going to go back over, again into the seam allowance, moving along within the seam allowance, so you always move along in the seam allowance so you're not, nothing is showing through on this side, and then catching that. I'm going to sit down. Very hard, I'm trying to do it up there, but I'm just going to sit down here and then I'll do a few more stitches and then I'll show you how it's looking. Okay. So hopping back over into the seam allowance, moving my needle along through the seam allowance and then coming up less than a centimetre actually, these are really quite small little stitches, and coming up in the folded edge of the binding. And take that pin out. Fab. Right, this is going to take me a little while, so we can have a bit of a chat whilst I'm doing it. So there you can see again. Who is sewing right now as they're watching? Is anyone sewing the Zadie? Is anyone sewing along with the Zadie? I think we've sort of falling into a little pattern where not everyone's sewing along this, but they're sewing just something else. So let's see if anyone is actually sewing right now and what you are sewing. If you're not sewing right now, maybe you could say, what is on your sewing table? What are you in the middle of sewing at the moment? Silence, guys, silence. No one is sewing. Is anyone? No one is sewing anything. There we go. A coatigan. Amanda is sewing her PJs. Nice. PJs and a coatigan. They're good for right now, aren't they? Ah, and Daisy's getting her fabrics together for the tonight's event. Yep, tonight's event on the big hand sew. Oh, we've got, look, made a bag, sewing the Zadie. Oh, someone's sewing the Zadie. And Val, you've just cut out your Zadie. Oh, great. Cross stitch for Mother's Day. Ah, and Helene, you've got the Zadie on your sewing table. Lots of lovely Zadies. Oh, preparing to take class at the Sew Expo. Oh, fun. And someone else going to a quilt retreat. Oh, that sounds nice. Ooh, quilt retreat. Oh, lovely. Oh, and Yvette, you're sewing along. Oh, there's more Zadies being sewn than I thought. That's lovely. Okay, I'm about halfway, guys. Halfway. Ooh. Next week, we still haven't put up more sew along dates, but we are going to. But next week, we are doing the Lois dress, which is one of those patterns that has just sort of got forgotten. When you've got so many patterns, that you do forget about some of them, and Lois is one of them that's got forgotten. And I think for me, Lois is a bit more worky, and maybe that's why I've forgotten about it. It came out last year. But because it's a little bit more worky and we've not been in that environment, I think I've just forgotten about it. But it's a nice simple make. So we're doing the Lois next week. And then after that, I think it's the pencil skirt, which I'm going to try and get some really nice stretch cottons in for. Oh, Lorianne, you're ready with it. Wonderful. I have not printed mine out yet. I've got to get some really lovely fabrics for it. Okay. We're getting to the end now, guys. Almost there. And I want to give it a nice press once I've done this. Okay. Feels like I'm doing the big hand sew. Don't normally do hand sewing on the sew-alongs. Right, so I'm at the end and I'm just doing a few over stitches through the seam allowance and through that folded edge just to anchor the thread again. And there, that is now done. So we need to press that again. To give it a press from the right side this time. Just crisped it right up. Okay. Right. Now, slip stitched it together. Fold on the sides so it lays directly on top and fold the bias. Yeah, we need to do our little V bit now. So that we kind of create a little, you can't have it like that, because if you left it like that, it would just be a funny little loop here. So what we do is we fold it so it looks like, you'll see this in the instructions, it sort of sticks out like that. We fold it like that, and then we are going to stitch on the machine across. So going from the point, the top of the cuff opening, diagonally down. So like that, okay? And this little stitch will help the whole of it sit properly. Okay. So just allow that cuff to sit better. So I'm going to just take that pin out. If you want to, you could draw on a little diagonal line if you wanted to. Because it's a short little line, I feel I could confidently do that without a line, but by all means put one in if you want to, if it will help you. Make sure you reverse. Okay, so that now, look at the difference. It's now sitting much more neatly. Okay. Yeah, and it says here just to trim down any excess, but if you've got anything like that on the bottom of your binding, just trim it down so it's level with the bottom of the sleeve. Got a little bit of discrepancy, obviously that big discrepancy we've already gotten rid of. Okay, fab. So I think that's all we're doing. Don't fold the sleeve. I'm just wondering, we want to do a press here. I think we're just going to go straight on to attaching our sleeves now. What time are we on? We've still got some time, so let's do that. So I've only got one sleeve, mine, but we might as well put one sleeve in. So leave the cuff. We'll put the actual cuff on afterwards. Oh, sorry guys. That was just someone putting a flyer through the door, no doubt. So we need to take one of the front. That's another sleeve. I don't want that. We need to take one of the front pieces and make sure that you've got the right side. So you've got a notch here that you can use to make sure you're using the right one. And I can see that the sleeve that I've got here that's the other side. So let's take one of our front pieces and place that right sides up. Take our sleeve, and that comes right side down. Just checking I have definitely got that the right way around. Yep, that will be the back of the sleeve. Okay. Fab. I think in the instructions I'm just thinking it's easier for you to see it this way around actually. Putting the sleeve right side up. So you've got the gather in here. Just move that out of the way so you can see a bit more clearly if I pull it back there, kind of. So you've got your single notches at the front piece here. So this is my sleeve on the bottom. This is my front piece here. You've got the shaping of the armhole down there, and then you've got the points there that need to meet. So it's kind of like almost like half an armhole. That's what we're pinning. It's much straighter. Okay. So make sure you're lining up those notches. That single notch. And lining up those raw edges. Okay. So it looks like that. I'll try and hold it. Okay. So we're now going to sew that with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Should just check. Yep. And we need to make sure that we're not catching our thread tails of our gather stitching. So yeah, we keep these tails here of the gather stitching out the way. They're on the front piece. We don't want those to be in the way. I'm actually as well, now that I've pinned it that way, I want to sew it from this side. It's just easier for me to sew it from that side with the extra fabric. So I'm just going to transfer those pins over. It's really sticking to the kind of rule that you start from the top down. So we're sewing this seam here on this blouse, so we want to make sure that we're going to sew it down from there to the armhole and the same down to the bottom of the armhole on that side. And if you were to sew it in a different direction on one side from the other, you might end up with some funny dragon lines. You never know, and you just don't want that to be in there. Making sure those two edges are staying together. It's being a bit naughty, trying to move away. Okay. Fab. So that's one side of the sleeve attached to the front of the blouse. So we're now going to trim the knot. Careful again not to trim your gather thread tails. You don't want to be cutting those off yet. So we're going to trim the seam allowance down to half their width, and then we're going to do some ziggy-zagging just to stop that from fraying, or if you've got your overlocker, you can just overlock there. We just want to get rid of some of this bulk. Okay, so then I'm just going to zigzag the two seam allowance edges together. Just stop those from fraying. Okay, so we are now pressing them towards the sleeve. So that seam is now going to get pressed up this way. Mr. Iron's coming back. So pressing him towards the sleeve. Let's get that in that direction. It'll be easier for me to do that. Done. Put him back. Put it back. And we are gonna now take the back. That is a sleeve. That is a front. Here is the back. So it's exactly the same thing, just attaching the other side of the sleeve to the back. And you'll have two notches on the back sleeve, just like you would in a regular armhole and sleeve. So a pair of notches together there. So we're just going to sew that again, and then we'll trim that down, and then we'll overlock that and press that towards the sleeve. Keep those tails of the gather stitching out the way as well. Oh, Coco's back. Oh no, I'm zigzagging. Coco, you distracted me. I'm going to be zigzagging that. Start again. Loves the sound of the sewing machine, does this one. Take your pins out as you get to them. What I really want to do, though I don't know if there'll be time, I'm going to see. What I'd love to be able to do is just sew this bit together so that you can see one side. You know, I like to try it on. I like to have a bit of a try on after a sew along so you can kind of get context of what we've done and where we've got to, what we've achieved. I think it's important to kind of keep stepping back and looking at your work when you're sewing, especially at the beginning or when you're doing a really long, difficult project, because it's just encouraging to sort of see the progress you've made. And you're desperately trying to not cut those gather stitches as I trim those off. Right, I'll just trim this down, then I'll zigzag it, and then let's pin the sleeve together at least. I have to say, it is really nice doing a raglan sleeve for a change. They are lovely and simple, and compared to a normal sleeve insertion, which is possibly my least favourite thing to do in dressmaking, I do not like it. It's nice not having to do that. Okay. I'm going to quickly press it. Down there. It's quick and easy for me to do it down there. So sorry guys, I've disappeared, but I'm still here. I'm now pressing this. I should have said actually, pressing it towards the sleeve as well. Okay guys, we're getting close. We're getting close to having something that resembles a blouse. It's currently looking like this. It does not look like a blouse. It looks like a weird piece of fabric that I've just draped over myself. But really you want to do the other side and then join it together. But I don't see how me just doing half of the blouse, it could still work, couldn't it? So let's do that. So we're basically, it's a bit like a t-shirt when you do this then. It's a sort of simple construction. So we're joining, this is the cuff that I've got here. And I'm pinning the raw edges of the sleeve together. Lining up the knot. Poppy! She's gone! Poor little Coco. Poor little Coco, just being chased and barked at. Don't worry, she gives Poppy a bit of that sometimes. Poppy just gets jealous, I think. funny though, they go through phases, Poppy and Coco, of being bothered by each other, and then they're very sweet and they sleep next to each other. At the moment, they are bothered by each other. Not super fans. Poppy sits on her little throne, her armchair at that end of the room, and like just sort of umpires. Coco, what's she doing? And every so often just jumps off a chair and chases after her. Very annoying. Okay, I've pinned all the way down, guys, so we've gone like that. So let's sew that together. 1.5 cm seam allowance, 5/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to slot it on. I won't do the zigzagging with you because it'll probably be the end of the session. Remember to put it back onto a straight stitch there. Just making sure that those seam allowances are both going towards the sleeve. That's the way we wanted them to go. So we press them in that direction, but fabric can be naughty and try and fight against the way that you've asked it to go. Okay, I've got something to try on. There we go. I have half a blouse. That is it. Okay, guys. Obviously, I've got a top underneath it, so it's hard for you to see. But ta-da! We've constructed together half a blouse. I feel like a pin is sticking into me. No. Anyway, I'm sorry I couldn't do all of the blouse with you, but obviously the instructions are really thorough and you'll be able to hopefully follow them from there, but we've done a lot of the tricky elements. So that is it for this week of sew-alongs. Thank you for joining me. Just a reminder that this was part 2, there is a part 1. And after I finish this, it uploads automatically to YouTube so you can watch it again there. Oh, thank you, Lorianne. So we will be back next week on Monday at 1 o'clock doing the lowest dress, and I'll be live tonight on our big hand sew event. You can still get a ticket, it's not too late if you want to. And apart from that, I cannot think if there's anything else. Oh yeah, I'll be keep an eye on our Instagram tomorrow for our lunchtime sew make. I've done a little make for the home, a little quick and easy one, so keep an eye on that. And see you all very soon. Thank you to Hannah for answering your questions and giving up her lunchtime. And yes, that is it. Bye, guys.